Well, hello, everyone. This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants. Welcome to our third annual MBA Summit, sponsored by Michigan Ross. I think we're going to have a really good session for you. Before we even start and I introduce our panelists, I want to talk a little bit about the format of today's event. We've been social listening and we've been receiving your questions. And so the questions I will ask our panelists will be informed by that action. I want you to know that when we're done, I'm going to do an interview with Scott DeRue, the Dean of Michigan Ross. We will talk about the future of the MBA and what he thinks about the upcoming fall semester. A lot of people are interested in that. Also, I want you to know that when after that event, actually, there's going to be an opportunity to go into a breakout room with Sujin, Michael, and Bruce. And you're welcome to do that to ask individual questions and to engage with them. So let me introduce everyone. Sujin Kwan, up in the right-hand corner, at least on my screen, is from Michigan Ross, legendary Michigan Ross alum. And she is the managing director of the full-time MBA program and the MBA program itself. On the left of the screen at the top is Michael Robinson, who is the Associate Director of MBA Admissions at Columbia Business School. And then underneath him is a familiar face to people who've watched MBA summits in the past and other webinars at Poets and Quants, Bruce Delmonico, who is the Assistant Dean and Director of MBA Admissions at Yale School of Management. Hey, welcome everybody. I'm glad you could be here.
Good to be here.
Good to be here. Thank you for having us.
Nice to be here. So I think on everyone's mind right now is still COVID. And some MBA programs have announced that they'll deliver remote learning this fall. Some have announced a more blended format where they're asking people to come to campus. Given all these changes and with a global recession looming, which is scary, is it worth it to apply right now? Sujin, what do you think?
So that's a big question, and I don't have a really succinct answer, but I'm going to give you what I think is a thorough answer. So it's definitely true that things, at least this fall, are going to look a little different. And answering the question about whether the MBA is worth it is really a personal decision that each candidate needs to weigh for themselves. For me, I'd go back to my consulting roots to answer the question and make a decision matrix that maps out the potential scenarios for fall 2021 and 2 years after that. So here's what the matrix would look like. Across the top are two scenarios for the pandemic. It will either be ongoing or it will be managed. Down the side are the two choices you have to make. You're either going to continue to work or go to business school. Then you fill in the boxes underneath. If the pandemic continues and a vaccine isn't widely available, chances are, if your organization weathers the storm, you may still be working remotely. Underneath that, if you were to go to business school, the program could start hybrid, as many of us are planning for now. But on the right-hand side, if the pandemic is under control, you're still going to be working in the same job probably that you're working in now. Underneath that, in the business school scenario, you're going to be learning and gaining new skills. Now let's think about what happens 2 years later. Across the top is the economy. By 2023, it could be sputtering or it could recover. If you'd stayed at work in 2021, your career options and earning potential in 2023 would be more limited than if you had gone to business school. Because you're going to get three things from a 2-year MBA program that you won't get if you stay at work. One, you'll meet and learn with hundreds of smart, ambitious, interesting people you wouldn't have met if you didn't go to business school. Two, you're going to learn how to network and interview for jobs in an industry or function that you're interested in going into. And most, if not all, MBA recruiters this year are planning to do virtual recruiting. So you're going to learn how to recruit and interview in the format in which recruiters are going to be recruiting you. And then third, you're going to gain access to a network of tens of thousands of business school alumni and hundreds of thousands of alumni in the broader university community. You could absolutely find another job through LinkedIn, but it's no secret that you're more likely to get a response if you have some kind of connection. And an MBA from a top school with supportive alumni provides that invaluable connection for life.
Spoken like a true consultant. I love your matrix. I love it.
Hard to escape.
Michael, do you anticipate any changes in this upcoming admission cycle and beyond?
Well, I don't have a matrix like Sujin, but I'll still answer,
We'll
right?
forgive you for that.
Yes. So I think that the what of our application process is pretty constant. And by the what, I mean identifying, recruiting, and yielding a class of emerging leaders. That's a constant. I think going forward, though, it's like how the how will change in terms of how to recruit, how to yield, and how to engage with the applicant population in mostly virtual environments. And I think that that's the key thing that we're dealing with. And then the other thing that that we're dealing with as well is that as long as there's a lack of clarity from a public health perspective, in terms of a lack of therapeutics or a lack of a vaccine, there is going to be real tension on the part of the applicant pool in terms of if most or part of my instruction and recruiting experience is going to be virtual, should I get some sort of tuition discount or accommodation and so on. So if you're in our shoes and you're talking about the program, it's important for us to kind of stress the long-term value. And then as Suchin kind of mentioned, like we may have future pandemics within the next 5 or 10 years going forward. So I think there's a skill set to working virtually that I think will benefit everyone going forward.
I'm depressed now. Hey, once this is over, I don't want to hear about a future pandemic, okay? Now, there are a lot of people who think this next admission cycle is going to be among the most competitive ever. And it's basically historical, right? I mean, generally when you have a recession, there's a boom in applications as people lose their jobs and they see the opportunities in front of them kind of diminish. And so they think, and particularly if you're in the cycle of this, late 20s, something time when it's the window to go to business school. And so people apply. Bruce, are you expecting this to be a very competitive season? And do you expect a big boom in MBA applications?
Yeah, that's another big question. I think we're hitting all the big topics now, and I know I'm trying to in my head on the fly. I'm trying to create a 2x2 to keep up with Sujin, but I don't know if I can do that. But you're right. I mean, you're right to invoke sort of the counter-cyclicality of the MBA admissions process relative to sort of the economy more generally. But I actually, thinking back to the Great Recession, the last most analogous example we have, and actually I would use that to invoke, maybe additional response to Sujin and Michael's answers to these last questions and thinking about the long-term perspective. Obviously, when you're in the middle of these situations, it's tough to pull yourself out and take the bigger perspective. But when we were in the middle of the Great Recession, you don't see the 10 years of economic growth that follow that in the long-term value of the MBA, and also to the application process, the durability of that, and not trying to make changes just in the moment for the sake of the current cycle, but thinking long-term. I would use that example to say that there's a lot that we don't know and can't predict. The MBA applications are countercyclical, but I remember in the Great Recession, actually, Sujin and Michael, we were all, not to date ourselves, we were all doing this then. My recollection is that it wasn't countercyclical. There wasn't a spike. I mean, there was a 1 year, maybe a little bit of a uptick, and actually we all have this extended round this year, which I think might have created some of that uptick, or kind of might be a little bit of the surge that we thought we would see maybe next year. But I remember that there wasn't the increase that we were anticipating because people were so nervous about their jobs, they just wanted to stay in the job they had. And so it's tough to predict. The other piece of it too, in addition to new applications, is what happens with people who are admitted to start this fall who defer to next year. Will those seats be taken? Will the classes already be full? And that's tough. I know that the number of schools, us included, are working through the deferral process and working through people who don't want to start this fall but want to start next fall. It's tough to even now to know what those numbers will look like. So this is kind of a long way to give maybe a sort of unhelpful answer, but I'm not sure it's going to be the most competitive season. I'm not sure that we're going to see the same spike that you would anticipate. And I think the Great Recession could be a model for that, we saw some increases, but we didn't see the dramatic increase that people were predicting. So I think I think it's up in the air right now. I would say, I guess, that as a piece of advice for candidates, I wouldn't take yourself out of the game. I wouldn't use the fear of this potential spike to cause you not to apply. I think there are two pieces that might not materialize, and the other piece is the competitiveness is the overall competitiveness number is not your chances of getting admitted. These averages are across the board, but your strong candidates always have a good chance. And so if you're a strong candidate, there's never a reason not to apply.
Right.
Can I add a quick
sure.
comment on that? Because like I this is my 18th year, and I expect to see double-digit increase next year. But going back to what Bruce said, I'm not sure it's going to be like a 10% increase in strong competitive applications. You might see a surge in rushed applications where people who didn't do their research and due diligence and so on. So you'll see more. So from a stats perspective, it may look like being more competitive, but it may not be as competitive as you think, just based on a rushed application.
John, can I add too?
Yeah, sure.
What we're going to see this year, most likely, is that most programs will shrink in size. What we may see next year is that programs rebound, that we have a bigger class than we will this year. So the competition also depends on what the numerator is going to be and not just the denominator. So don't take yourself out. All of us are interested in having full classes, and hopefully the market will rebound next year.
Indeed. Okay, we got a really good question from an audience member. I'll give it to Sujin.
Okay.
What's a good way to see if a candidate is MBA ready or not? Put another way, what questions or criteria should a candidate ask him or herself to see if they're ready to pursue an MBA?
So I think it boils down to two questions. It's what do you want to do and what will you bring to the table? So specifically, you should ask yourself the question, do I have a career goal for which the knowledge, skills, and network I'd gain from an MBA would be valuable? So for example, if you want to continue being a musician or an engineer, you probably don't need an MBA. But if you want to leverage those or other careers into something more, or switch careers altogether, then an MBA does make sense. The second question, more specifically, is do I have academic, professional, and personal experiences that would contribute to my classmates' learning? So unlike in college experience, getting an MBA is not a passive endeavor. You're going to be expected to actively engage in class discussions, team projects, and co-curricular activities. Professors and classmates are going to look to you to have something to contribute. So if your answer to the career goal and contributions questions are yes, then you're in a good position to apply to business school now.
I was waiting for that matrix.
But it's two things.
Yes,
and it's
exactly.
a yes or a no.
Hey, Michael, let's say you determine that you are in fact ready. You're MBA ready to go. What's the best way to determine fit with a school, its culture, its programs, its geography?
Yeah, so I believe that fit really matters, and I think it's important to be thoughtful, to be introspective and reflective, and look inward before you look outward. So by that I mean like thinking about your ideal learning environment. Do you prefer big cities versus small cities and so on? Does the method of instruction matter to you? Those kinds of things are important. So again, so like, what is the best environment for me to succeed within this space, right? And then so you have that, right? And then start looking outward in terms of how do I engage with people from this community? So we would say like talk with current students, alumni, watch as many online classes as you can and so on. But the key word is like really thoughtful engagement with members from that community So before we're saying visit, 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 and now we're saying watch, watch, watch. But the same is true. And then the cool thing though with Zoom is that like it's easier to put these things together. So before, for example, when you actually went to campus to visit a class, we were limited to like 5 to 10 spots. Now we can open that up and so on. So it's easier to like engage with folks, and you don't have to do all the travel. So that part is good. But the key word is engage, engage, engage with members of that community.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Particularly now in lieu of a campus visit, where you can't go and share a coffee and sit in the class. So it is watch, watch, watch. And talk, talk, talk.
Talk, talk, talk.
Bruce, and we'll go through all three here. How would you describe the culture of your school? This is another audience question as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to start. I imagine we'll all pitch in. And I think, yeah, and to build on Michael's point, it is, I think one nice thing, I mean, one sort of silver lining of the current situation is, these online events definitely democratize the process. It's not just about who's able to get to campus. You were able to reach more people and engage with more people. And hopefully through the process, you do get a sense of what our culture's like, what our community is like. I will say you should think about points of equivalence and points of differentiation. I think points of equivalence, I think we're all going to talk about our communities as sort of collaborative and collegial. I think it's probably the rare program that says we're cutthroat and everyone's out for it to get the other person. I don't think that's really how we present ourselves. I don't think that's how we are. So I think you want to think about the next level beyond that and what aspects of the culture maybe are a little bit different. I think for us, and there will be again overlap across the different communities, but I think for us, just briefly, we are a very mission-oriented place. Our mission to educate leaders for business and society, that was our founding mission. It's very broad, very multi-sector. I think it brings in people who I think are broad-minded, intellectually curious. I think the thing that I think speaks to me, I think when people think of Yale, they think about, because of the mission, they think that, we are very collaborative, but it doesn't mean we're not competitive. I think one student put it to me, I think, well, the fact that we're constructively competitive at Yale. We think that everybody can be successful. It's not, if I succeed, it's not at the expense of my classmates or others. And I think underlying that, I guess the one word I would point to is there's a real sense of optimism at Yale SOM. I think that we have optimistic students. That culture, that kind of idea permeates the culture. So that's, I think, in a nutshell, how I would describe the culture at Yale.
Sujin?
So, like Bruce said, none of us are going to say that we're not collaborative, that we're cutthroat and competitive. We're very similar in how we describe ourselves. You really need to get the words, the feels, the stories from students. But if I had to boil it down to a few words, it would probably be supportive and inspirational. So in business school, you're going to be challenged in ways that you never have been before. It could be by classes you haven't taken before, or the intense preparation you're going to need to do for recruiting for a completely new and unfamiliar industry, or the real life projects and investments or people you're going to be tasked with managing. But you're going to be inspired to do that because you're going to see your classmates doing that. And through it all, you're going to be supported by your classmates more than you could have imagined in a business school setting. Everyone thinks business, very competitive, everyone's out for themselves, but it's not like that at most schools. And one of the things that is really special about our community is how much they are motivating each other to do things that are really hard, to step outside of their comfort zones so that they can grow. And then they reflect on it together, and by the end of 2 years, they're amazed at who they've become, not just because of the opportunities that were available, but also because of how much they've been inspired by seeing their classmates take risks, put themselves out so that they can learn and grow too. And so they're willing to meet with failure, to take on risks, so that they can become this transformational leader by the end of the 2 years.
Right. And Michael, I imagine that New York City figures prominently in the culture of Columbia Business School.
Yes, it does. And when Bruce and Susan were speaking, I was like, check, 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 in terms of collaborative and being supportive at the same time. So the people that we admit, have been used to being successful. they're driven, but again, their success does not depend on making someone else feel. So that is what I love. Now we are in COVID, but New York definitely is a part of the culture. So the people in our program who choose to come to our program like to be in very dynamic, fast-paced environments. Like they need to like juggle lots of balls at the same time. And there is something that I heard a student say many years ago, which I think is still kind of applicable, not today, but hopefully within the next few months, where she said that the Columbia student is the kind of person that will work with you on a problem set or a case until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and say, okay, well, let's go out and get a beer. And there's a place open to actually get a beer in New York at that time, as opposed to going to your fridge, right? But again, not now, but when we kind of go back to normal. So there's that kind of energy that I've always loved. And then the last thing I will say is that we are in a time of lots of social unrest, and like diversity, inclusion, and equity are big issues on our campuses, and students are kind of like driving that conversation in terms of like, how do we get better in terms of cultural competency? So it's not just a conversation about race or gender, but like, how do you have that conversation from a global perspective? So the person from South Korea still has context as to why Black Lives Matter, right? So there's that, and students are driving that thing. So I continue to be hopeful, and I continue to be inspired by our young people.
Great. Okay, now here is a perennial question, but nonetheless, you know, one thing about the MBA admissions field is every year, or every 18 months actually, the whole thing turns over. So you have a whole bunch of new people who really don't know what the previous group learned. Question about the GMAT or the GRE, which has actually become a little more complicated as schools have opened up a bit more. Some are taking MCATs and LSATs. Some are even going back and taking SATs and ACTs. Do you really have a preference or not between the GMAT and the GRE primarily? Sujin?
So the short answer is no, there is no preference. Most US schools now accept both the GMAT and the GRE. We wouldn't accept it if we didn't think it was a useful indicator of a candidate's academic potential. That said, here's what I would do if I hadn't already taken one of them, or even if I had. I'd take a practice test of both the GMAT and the GRE and see which one I do better on, and then invest all of my time in just preparing for that one test. That's the same advice I gave to my sons in deciding between the SAT and the ACT for college, because you want to put forward your best foot. And so invest your time in the one that you think you will do better on.
Right, exactly. Michael, what are the biggest mistakes that applicants make?
I'm smiling as I see the question and hear the question. So I think just being inauthentic, and people just not doing enough due diligence. So there's a difference between a strong applicant and a strong application, right? So sometimes like I see folks who, well, I have great test scores, I have a great GPA, I work for this great company. This means I'm automatic for school X, Y, or Z. And then they almost like phone it in, right? So what you may see is a bunch of very generic essays that can apply to any school. They haven't done any research. And one, they don't have a sense of, okay, well, if you're in this environment for the next 2 years, like, how do you maximize that experience? And then they haven't really asked themselves, like, how can I contribute to the people who are going to be my classmates? And they don't really have an answer for that, right? So they're strong on paper, but they're not a strong applicant. So and then sometimes I've actually written this in notes, like lazy application, you know? So like, great person, but but like the person kind of phoned it in, right? So again, right, I guess for us, right, put the work in, and then for most people who are 27, 28, which is a typical age for applicant pool, this is a $200,000 investment, which is the biggest investment for most people of that age, right? So then take it seriously. Put the work in, put the time in.
Yeah, really good advice. And you're right. I think if you have certain numbers and they're above your class averages, there may be the sense that, okay, I'm pretty solid. I don't have to worry as much, but you're absolutely right. Okay, here's one of my favorite questions. It is from an audience member. Let's give it to Bruce. If there's one thing you can change about MBA admissions, what would it be? Bruce is loving this, I can tell.
I'm getting all the softballs here. So just one thing.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I could go on. And I actually would be interested to hear. I know we'd be interested to hear what Sujin and Michael have to say too about this, because there are different things I would point to about the process. And I guess I would point. I guess to answer this, I would point to maybe the applicant-facing part of the process. Obviously, there are things that happen behind the scenes, process improvements or other evaluative tools that we're experimenting with that we would love to be able to put into place, but there are different constraints. But in terms of from the applicant perspective, I think one thing, we're all competing for talent. We all want great students at each of our schools, but I think. And so I think we each have our own processes, but at the same time, I think we're all to a good degree, advocates for graduate management education. We want, obviously, I want great people at Yale, but I also want, if they're not going to be at Yale, I want them at Michigan and Columbia and elsewhere. And I think it goes the same in the other direction. And so, as we compete for talent, we're competing and we're talking about things like the sort of the culture of our communities and what kind of students we have at our schools, and there are very substantive ways in which we are sort of competing for talent. And I would love for the process to be focused on that. And it's sometimes frustrating to me that things like timing of enrollment deposits or timing applications, kind of causes people to have to make candidates have to make decisions about things or based on things that seem less substantive, less substantial. And so I would love it if the process could be coordinated more so that people didn't have to say, I would have loved to have been at Michigan, but I couldn't go to Michigan because the timing of the enrollment deposits didn't line up and I had this, other things I was thinking about, and the decision wasn't released at the right time. Obviously we all have admitted student weekends, for example, and they can't all be on the same weekend, but if there are ways to streamline the process to, applicants are filling out the same information for each of our applications, if there's a way to only have to do that once instead of how many ever times. So I think there are ways to streamline the process to make it even more candidate friendly that I think would be beneficial to everybody involved. So that's my short. Maybe I might be alone in this and that might be kind of a crazy, not something that other people see as an issue, but I do feel like there are inefficiencies in the process that could be eliminated that would allow us to streamline things on the candidate side, on our side, and allow for people to focus on the things that matter as opposed to making decisions based on sort of some ancillary considerations.
I think applicants would love that answer.
Yeah. Can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
And this is more like a pipeline kind of conversation. So if you look at a number of the leading liberal arts colleges, there are more schools that are becoming like test optional, right? So that they're de-emphasizing the importance of standardized testing in the context of the admissions process. So I'm actually watching that with lots of curiosity. And then just add one more data point. So I've kind of led the recruiting efforts in Africa for over a decade at Columbia. And there's some very, very big cities, let's say Lagos, Nigeria, that has over 20 million people. There's one test center. There's very little in the way of test prep resources and so on. So a 700 in Lagos is not the same thing as a 700 in New York City, just in terms of access to resources. But the way we're kind of judged is the same, right? So for us in admissions, it's not that we want to basically admit the highest people with the highest test average. It's more about like, can this person succeed academically in that class? And there are ways to get the right answer to that question beyond just like a GRE or a GMAT or executive assessment and so on. So I'm really curious to see what's happening there, and we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting experiment. That is true in the UCs in California as well. So we'll see. Now, Sujin, sometimes when an applicant goes to a website and reads what everyone requires, they may get the sense that you have to walk on water to get into your school. But very few applicants have a perfect application. And what I mean by that is there may be a potential red flag or something that doesn't quite meet the class profile. And one common area is GPA. A lot of people who go off to undergraduate school may not be all that well prepared to transition into this new and different lifestyle away from home. And sometimes their GPAs suffer, and they may be applying with a lower than class average GPA that you might have in your class profile. So what can they do to still prove that they're really strong academically?
So all of us have what we call a holistic evaluation process, which means that we're not just looking at one component of the application. And there are a lot of other indicators of your academic potential in your application besides your GPA. One of the things that we'll consider from your undergrad experience is not just the number, but also what kind of classes did you take? What was your major? What school did you go to? How much did you challenge yourself? You can't change any of that, so that's already done. You can study for the GMAT or the GRE and try to get the best score possible. And then your work experience can also be an indicator of your potential to be able to do the kind of work that you're going to do in business school. And it doesn't have to be in business per se. It can be in the government, it could be a nonprofit, it could even be in the military. Some of those things are going to give you experiences and skills that will be helpful for business school. So the GPA is just one component of the broader picture that we're looking at.
Right. Michael, what distinguishes a good MBA candidate from a great one?
So this is actually a very tough question for me, right? And it's something I've thought about and something that I really, really struggle with, right? So when you think about the people on this panel, we serve as gatekeepers to very elite spaces, right? So what does that mean? The majority of the young people in our program are people who, regardless of their background, found ways to kind of thrive in elite spaces. But then when you think about just like how talent is broadly distributed in the world, there are people who are just as talented who never had that kind of access. So does that make them less great? And this is very personal for me because when I was a young man, I spent the 90s working with hip hop artists and so on. And I met some of the most driven people in my life, but they did not have the profile to quote unquote be competitive in a school like ours, right? So I live with that, right? So, and then we're in an age of like, lots of economic inequality, and then there's like lots of tension within the streets. So then how do our institutions become more responsive to that, where we're kind of broadening access to opportunity? So going back to the question about good versus a great candidate, right? So is someone who's a great candidate someone who just had access to resources where they hired a consultant? So some of the tutors for the GMAT sometimes charge $200 an hour. And then you take a 10 session minimum, right? So that's the process, right? So sometimes a person that looks great on paper is just a function of like access to resources, right? So then that's why I struggle with this, because like we're graded and judged in our own league tables based on like unequal access to stuff, right? So how do we get better around that? And I struggle with that because like if you do something and then you drop in the rankings and so on, then alums like what's going on and so on. So then what is the right balance? What is the right balance?
Yeah, really true. Interesting. So a perennial question as well is about recommendation letters. So Bruce, is there an ideal person who should fill out that recommendation form for a candidate? Should it be a more senior person in your firm who may know you less? Should it be the person who knows you and knows your work day in and day out? and has that intimacy factor, that who can really speak to your strengths and your weaknesses. Who's the ideal recommendation letter from?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would, just as a prelude to that, I echo what Sujin and Michael was saying about the holistic process and understanding context. I think that's one thing more and more, and I think it's an excellent point about sort of testing and the constraints we, I think the sometimes unhealthy unhealthy pressures we feel about, in terms of sort of testing and understanding the context and in trying to get beyond those numbers and understand that the applicant in a deeper and I think more productive way. Recommendations are one aspect of that. And for that reason, I think I feel comfortable speaking on behalf of all of us. This is one area where I think we would all say you want to have someone who knows you well, someone you work with more closely. Don't go for the more senior person just for the sake of the title. That's not going to be productive. And I think in terms of the actual recommendation letter itself, in terms of how we use them, we want someone who works more closely with you because we want more substantive advice, more substantive insight into you as a candidate. So it's not helpful for us to say this candidate was, is collaborative, is a good team player, and is smart, and whatever qualities you want to insert. We don't want just that conclusory language. We want examples. We want concrete examples of behaviors that you as a candidate have displayed, you as a professional have displayed. And that you can only get that from someone you work with closely. And so that's why we care about that. So it's not just someone who you work with, but someone who you work with who then can speak in concrete and in substantive ways about how you sort of navigate the workplace, the qualities that you demonstrate and speak in real detail and not just in sort of high level conclusory language. I think I'm comfortable that we would all say that same thing, not just the schools here, but any school that you would be thinking about applying to.
Totally. So Sujin, there's a lot of worry about the career prospects of MBAs given COVID. What do you have? Any thoughts about that? I mean, after all, most of the people are going to apply in this next cycle. They won't be getting out of the school for, 2.5 years pretty much. So should that be a concern?
So here's the thing. You shouldn't decide whether to get an MBA based on what the economy looks like right now. You'll be graduating actually 3 years from now if you apply for next year. And who knows what the economy will look like by then. Back in 2017, no one predicted that a pandemic would take down the global economy in 2020. And economists now are predicting anywhere from a V-shaped recovery to a W, to an L, to a U. It's alphabet soup in terms of predictions for the economy.
True.
So by pursuing an MBA, what you're betting on is that your career options and earning potential will be better than they would be without an MBA. And it's a pretty safe bet. In every economic scenario in the past, an MBA has given people more options and higher salary potential than they would have had without an MBA. And then there's a compound impact of that over time. So regardless of what the economy looks like now or even 3 years from now, as I said in my answer to the first question, you're going to be better off with the MBA.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Okay, here's a great question. I love this idea. We'll start with Michael. Tell me about a candidate that you took a bet on. Maybe even some of your colleagues in the admissions committee said, Michael, I'm not so sure. You admitted the person enrolled, and the person became a big success.
So I won't call any names,
Right.
Because for privacy reasons. But when you think about the range of people within our program, sometimes the people that have questionable academics are the most amazing people in the program. And when you think about it, right, it makes perfect sense, because like if you're going to like turn down 4 or 5 or 6 people that have 740s and 760 GMATs and 3/8s, and from, to bring in this person with a test score 100 points lower, who has questionable math skills or whatever, and so on, and then things like, why, right? And very often that person has a very, very powerful why, where they literally like I mean, think about this person. I mean, this woman, she just radiated confidence and so on. And you just felt that there was something special about her. And then she almost like believed in her own power before the MBA, right? So she already had this great potential, but struggled in the first year quant classes, right? And we kind of knew that because the GMAT kind of predicted that, right? But the thing that I loved about her was that she still took more quant classes where she knew she would struggle because she had this really strong intellectual curiosity. She was taking coding classes and she was a marketing person and so on, and is now going on to a great job at TikTok and so on. But the thing is, when she led professional panel discussions within the Media Management Association, like you can see like all her classmates respected her, right? So so she belonged, right? And I expect her to be like a leader of national profile going forward. But the key thing is that like they grind, you know, they hustle. Like you can't outwork them, and that's what I remember most about this person.
I love that. Bruce, do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of favorites. The one that came to mind more immediately, sort of similar in the sense that obviously, you know, risk in the sense that, you know, the testing was not, you know, the numbers you might see otherwise. So a little bit of sort of academic concern relative, but just the, you know, looking at the distance traveled, someone who, you know, for a time, actually, you know, lived with her mom in her car, you know, was homeless and just would not give up, just persevered. And, you know, in understanding, as I said before, in, you know, understanding the context of someone's the background and how far they've come from where they were, and just the resilience to just do what it takes to succeed, and knowing that that would translate to, you know, the academics, you know, certain aspects of academics might be tough, but they, you know, ended up being fine. And this person, you know, became a real leader on campus and has gone on to be incredibly successful afterwards. But understanding the context in which someone's presents himself and the hardships that they've had to overcome, it says a lot. And so, you know, I think that's a challenge for us in admissions, as we've said, that being able to understand the full person and understand what they've had to overcome and where they're coming from, but being able to see the potential and see that person just kind of blossom and really, as I said, be a true leader on campus and be very successful afterwards is gratifying personally, but I think it's just important to be part of that process.
Yeah, that's a great story. Sujin, I know you have favorites.
I do. They're all my favorites. I can't pick just one, just like with my kids. But I think there are a lot of candidates out there who worry that maybe business school isn't right for them because they're non-traditional. So I have a story about a woman who just graduated this past April. She was non-traditional by many opinions. She majored in environmental studies and philosophy. She took the GRE, had no business experience. In fact, she worked for 3 years as a bee pollinator program coordinator at a nonprofit that promotes organic and sustainable agriculture. She didn't know anyone with an MBA and had said that she was scared that she wasn't good enough to get into an MBA program and that her weird background would hold her back. She couldn't have been more wrong. At Ross, she became a member of the consultant club, the community consultant club. She did a map project with AT&T. She participated in 5 national case competitions, placing first and second in 2 of them. And then she went on to pursue a dual degree with our School of Environment and Sustainability. And because of that, she was able to do 2 internships, one with the Environmental Defense Fund and the other with McKinsey. And that's where she'll be working full time. So from a bee pollinator to a McKinsey consultant, she'll tell you that business school transformed her into a more critical thinker, a better leader, and a more confident problem solver. And that's what an MBA can do for you.
Wow. 3 great stories. I bet you there are people in our audience who may not fit these profiles exactly. They may not be pollinating bees or sleeping in cars or whatever. But I think what you get out of that is a sense that, you know, you're looking for people who can be special and who want to fulfill the potential that's inside them. And many times what they've done before may not exactly line up in the perfect linear way with their perception of what an MBA student should be. And the fact that you're open to look at these very different people and to bring them into class and to allow others to share their insights and their experiences and make the MBA experience more fulfilling because of it is brilliant. Love it. Well, listen, I cannot believe that our time is over. But Sujin, thank you so much. Michael, thank you. Bruce, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.